projected on the video screen. I'm right now just kind of looking at a black area, but if I could see what's on the major screen there, that would be helpful. Yeah, there you go. I'm starting to move into focus. There I am. Okay. Just so I know what people are seeing, were you able to download my power or my keynote presentation?
I will try and get it just now. We had some problems with the format.
Yeah, it's a Mac format, but if it's not possible, that's all right as well. It's just a lot prettier when when the photographs are included. Can you hear me all right?
Perfectly.
Okay, good.
I don't think we'll be able to do the presentation, sorry.
That's okay. That's all right. I'll just I'll lay it out as clearly as I can. Let's see. To begin with, I think it's necessary to just acknowledge that we're in a very tenuous situation. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for inviting me and being interested in the theories and hypotheses that I've developed around cannabis and climate change. There is a time limited quality to the situation that I'm sure everyone is aware of. Climate change is a very immediate threat for several different reasons, not just the temperature increases and the effects of those increases, but also for the effects that temperature increase and increased UV radiation from the sun potentially can have on other feedback loops that can accelerate what's already started. And so if there's anything that I bring to this conversation that I think is the most valuable, it's the urgency. This is the third year that I've presented Cannabis versus Climate Change to the World Hemp Congress. And while I'm always happy to talk with my friends in Slovenia, I think the urgency of and the immediacy of the situation is radically under-regarded by not only the political leaders and industrial leaders who have vested interests to protect in keeping things the way they are, but also, I think to a certain extent, the contemporary cannabis culture has failed to assert itself and reclaim its own legitimacy. The fact is that, as my countryman Doug Fine pointed out, we have evolved with this plant over many millions of years, actually, before modern man achieved the level of physical evolution that we have. We were already ingesting cannabis, which is a plant that's estimated to be 35 million years old. We actually popped up on the evolutionary radar long after cannabis had already established itself on this planet. So it's no surprise that our physiology would include an endocannabinoid system. And in fact, I think we can presume that what's true for human physiology is true for other creatures with whom we share this planet and the planet itself. Cannabis is not optional for human existence on this planet. Cannabis is both unique and essential to our sustainable existence on Earth because it provides services and multiple layers of services to humanity and other creatures on this planet that no other plant provides. And I think recognizing cannabis as both unique and essential is the first step in legitimizing the contemporary cannabis culture as the world's oldest global culture. And I think that's necessary in order to dispel the shadows of reefer madness that continue to haunt our social evolution. As a species, we've turned our back on the most valuable agricultural resource, the most healing agricultural resource, the most sustainable and potentially globally distributed and abundant agricultural resource, and the only resource that produces complete nutrition and sustainable biofuels from the same harvest. That feature, that quality, that property is something that makes cannabis both unique and essential. Cannabis is the only crop that is capable of producing the atmospheric aerosols that used to be produced by the boreal forests and the marine phytoplankton that are currently in decline and severely threatened by a combination of environmental conditions that have created inertia toward systemic collapse. And that's really what the greatest concern is the systemic collapse that results from an increase in UVB radiation that is being measured, and particularly in the polar regions. And so to look at the effects of increasing UVB radiation on the rest of the biosphere, just to begin with, puts into perspective why cannabis is so critically important and why, in fact, cannabis is mankind's functional interface with the natural order that governs this planet in reality. I like to call that reality as opposed to political reality, because the political reality surrounding cannabis does not serve us in our chances for avoiding extinction. And really that's what the object of the game is, to avoid annihilating our species and all other species on this planet. And so if we look at cannabis as a tool for doing that, then we can see that the limitations and the regulation of cannabis does not serve to create the abundance that's needed. And while there may be industrial and corporate considerations in selecting cultivars for planting, let me say in defense of feral hemp that feral hemp has an adaptability property for being able to adjust to soil and climate conditions that hybrid strains that are being grown don't really have. And while you can selectively breed feral hemp to have the properties that you're looking for in industrial production, the priority in my mind is the expansion of the arable base to produce sufficient quantities of atmospheric aerosols to block the solar radiation that is currently threatening to increase the solubility of mercury, arsenic, and selenium compounds out of aqueous solution and toxify the biosphere. And it's already showing up in the cetaceans and the whales and dolphins in the Arctic, whose mercury levels in their bodies are in excess of what would be expected in considering the ambient levels of mercury in that environment. We are looking at systems that we don't fully understand that keep shifting. The climate modeling that's being done now is very difficult to have confidence in, because the baseline relationships are changing so fast that the models can't keep up with the changes in the biosphere. And those relationships have what are called feedback loops associated with them that take us further down the climate change path at a more accelerated rate. And so a lot of the timelines that we've been shown in the past have proven to be understated and underestimated, because scientists don't want to be perceived as being alarmist. And yet it's an alarming situation. And what I'm hoping to introduce is sufficient motivation and rationale for a global mobilization of the contemporary cannabis culture, which is the world's oldest global culture and has the potential to serve as the basis for what I call Gaia therapeutic industries. And the Gaia therapeutic industries are those industries that are actively healing to the planet. What's true for human physiology is also true for Gaian physiology, or the ecological relationships that determine the quality of life on Earth. And because we have cut down 50% of the northern forests, the evergreen forests that used to produce the fragrant aerosols that reflect the UVB radiation from the sun away from the planet, and because we've killed off about half of the marine phytoplankton that also did the same thing, we have half of the atmospheric aerosol protection that we did 50 years ago. And so that drastic an increase, or that rapid an increase in the levels of UVB radiation are a fundamental threat, fundamental undermining of established relationships that we have to respect. If we don't, then we'll set ourselves up for an unthinkable future. And really, it's our children that will suffer for it. So, at this point, in my opinion, what needs to happen is that the eradication of ancient strains of feral hemp absolutely needs to stop. The seed production and fiber qualities of those cultivars need to be responsibly assessed and quantified. Those seeds in the Midwest in the United States are ripening right now, and they need to be harvested. In this country and in other countries where hemp grows wild, the adaptability of those ancient strains is something that will allow for expansion of the arable base and regeneration of damaged, contaminated, and desertified soils, because cannabis is unique and essential in that it's also a pioneer crop. It is a pioneer crop that's non-invasive, which means that it's a plant that you can broadcast seed it, you can throw the seeds around, and without any tending, those seeds will come up in soils where the roots can penetrate. And so the usefulness of cannabis for regenerating damaged soils and decontaminating lands that have elevated levels of radiation and providing nutritional support and immune system support through whole plant nutrition. The antioxidant properties of the cannabis plant are the antidote to radiation poisoning. They're the antidote to the toxicity of our environment that is resulting from the prohibition of critically essential natural resource. If cannabis hadn't been banned 77 years ago in the United States, it's likely that we wouldn't be facing climate change right now, because the truly free market, the free agricultural market, would have selected for the most cost-effective and efficient fuel, which is not petroleum, not coal, it's not nuclear. It is, in fact, the regional production of biomass that simultaneously produces energy and food. And that's what makes cannabis so incredibly important as a rotational crop in our regional agricultural economic dynamic, because you're not inducing food insecurity by growing energy crops. And that's the big stumbling block with a lot of biofuels production, is that you have to choose between food or fuel. And with cannabis, that's not the case. You can produce both from the same harvest. The seeds go that way for food, and the stems go that way for fuel. At the same time, the atmospheric aerosol production produces the terpenes that go up into the stratosphere and block the solar UVB radiation. So the other side of the equation, what happens if we don't initiate a massive polar shift in values as part of our conscious evolution as a species, is that the economic disparity that we're currently suffering from, the endless wars, the endless aggression, the imbalances that have been set in motion, will only become more extreme and more out of balance. So I think it's important for us to recognize that we live in a state of grace at this point. And if we wish to resolve the imbalances that were initiated by our grandfathers 77 years ago, where we were set on the wrong path, the wrong road, then we need to recognize that cannabis is essential for our successful rebalancing of the environment, particularly the atmosphere. In recognizing cannabis as essential, it immediately brings the question, well, is there a legal avenue that hasn't been considered yet in affording access to cannabis? And in the work that I've done, in my opinion, the most time-efficient and effective way to access cannabis is not through legislation that has proven to be a time-consuming distraction, very expensive distraction, costing far too many growing seasons. And the fact is that growing seasons are the only thing we can't make more of. Every growing season that passes without the benefits of cannabis agriculture is gone forever. And so we need to acknowledge that time is the limiting factor in the equation of survival. And the urgency of resolving climate imbalances makes the legal justification for demanding access to cannabis much stronger. There is an executive order that was signed by President Obama in March of 2012. It's Executive Order 13603. And it's an emergency preparedness document that is essentially identical to 6 other executive orders signed by 6 other American presidents. And in Executive Order 13603, President Obama refers to a U.S. federal protocol as essential civilian demand for strategic resource, and hemp is specifically named in that document and in the other 6 executive orders as a strategic resource. Essential civilian demand is a protocol that needs to be globalized because the threat is a global threat. And while emergency preparedness documents for the United States are specific to our country and our national security, the truth is climate change is a global threat, and our species needs to cooperate and work together if we are all going to make it. The impending genetic modification and immune suppression that result from increasing UVB radiation are other threats that are vastly underregarded by the political leadership in considering the benefits and the potential for hemp to affect the increasing levels of UVB radiation, which incidentally also affects the temperature increase, and the temperature increase affects the ozone depletion, which allows more UVB to reach the surface of the planet. So you see there are many feedback loops and many relationships that make cannabis agriculture a critically important tool in resolving climate change and for also resolving issues of food security and nutrition and alternative sustainable organic fuel production. There absolutely needs to be a ban on transgenic modification of cannabis the premise that THC is dangerous is in fact the opposite of what's true, and yet the opposite of what's true is being used to determine policy in the United States and in other countries. So the first thing that needs to happen is that the polar shift in values from illegal to essential needs to be faced head on, and to challenge the rightful jurisdiction of any court over a natural God-given resource that is both unique and essential. I founded the California Cannabis Ministry when my son was born in 2007 because I realized that there was a spiritual dimension and also a legal dimension to that spiritual orientation to cannabis. And so in my contemplation of cannabis, it occurred to me that our freedom to farm every herb-bearing seed is the first test of religious freedom. So in any country where there is religious freedom, then people are well within their rights to farm every herb-bearing seed, because if you concede rightful jurisdiction over any herb-bearing seed, then you concede rightful jurisdiction over every herb-bearing seed. And as a matter of fact, here, this is something that I'll put a little bit more light on. These herbs, whoops, that didn't work. Okay. These are just some flowers that I picked yesterday from my garden. And every one of these flowers, every one of these herbs has therapeutic benefit, just as cannabis has therapeutic benefit, particularly when eaten raw. And many of you are familiar with the work of Dr. William Courtney and his wife Kristen, and the realization that cannabis is a nutritional essential. It's a dietary essential from conception to death, and in inducing scarcity of dietary essential, much more harm is being done to our society and to individual people than could ever be done by the use of marijuana. And certainly the only problems that anybody's ever had with marijuana have taken place in the context of a drug war, which is ironic because if you make the distinction between drugs and herbs, it's pretty obvious that drugs don't make seeds and herbs do make seeds. And so the legal distinction has never been acknowledged. The work that needs to be done is for the people who recognize the true value of cannabis to reclaim their rightful access to it. And that is unregulated access, untaxed, and as far as I'm concerned, with no more interference from any government than any of those other herbs from my garden has incurred. The therapeutic benefits of cannabis are a fundamental human right. They're not only a fundamental human right, but mankind is also far beyond its rightful authority in legislating scarcity of a unique and essential food resource upon which other species also depend for their survival. And I think that our homocentric attitudes have brought us to a point where if we don't make some very rational decisions very soon, then the ripping points, the extinction level events, including things like the release of methane clathrate deposits from the frozen tundra that could accelerate global warming because of the effect of methane in the atmosphere. Things like that are loose cannons on the deck, and they are rolling around without predictable timeline associated with them. And that fact and the extinction level dangers that we face justify accelerating the process of normalizing our relationship with cannabis. That we recognize that the prohibition of it, the regulation of it, all of the laws that are in place now are based on lies, essentially. And our failure to properly assess the role of cannabis in our social evolution as a feedstock, not only for our bodies, but for earth healing therapeutic industries, is absolutely long overdue. And the longer we wait, the greater the chance is that by the time we realize it's too late to make a difference, it will have been too late for quite some time. So if I can contribute anything to the conversation in Slovenia today, then perhaps the people who represent the contemporary cannabis culture all over the world can agree that cannabis is both unique and essential to sustainable human existence on this planet. And if we can just achieve that much, then we are in a position to reclaim cannabis by essential civilian demand. And at this point, I think I've talked enough. I think my cup of coffee is wearing off. And so I'd like to open up the discussion for questions if there are.
Some questions here? Yeah. Just a second. Another occasion, we are very happy, Mr. Hartmann, that you are with us this year, Majdarovic in this side. I don't know if we see each other this year because we have some technical difficulties. I'm sorry, but anyway, we see you wonderful here in Slovenia. We hear you wonderful here in Slovenia, and we are very proud that you are our senior speaker even this year, third year World Hemp Congress. And we started this year to go global much more stronger. And I hope that somebody will hear us, that somebody will change their mind, that somebody will started work. What is much more important, started work, started reacting, started action. We have some questions.
Hello, Mr. Hartmann. I'd like to ask a couple of questions. The first one is about the terpenes you quoted before regarding the atmospheric aerosol.
Yes.
Can you explain further this issue, please?
We understand each other? Well, question?
Yes, I understood the question. The terpenes produced by cannabis are tremendously therapeutic in and of themselves. They're antioxidants, they are antifungal, antiviral components in the plant. If there were no cannabinoids in cannabis, it would still be one of the most therapeutic plants on the planet because of the terpenes and the proteins and a lot of other components in the plant. But the terpenes in particular are valuable because they have the property of reflecting solar radiation away from the planet. They act like little liquid crystals in the sky to refract the solar radiation back out into space. And so they provide a terpene screen in the stratosphere that used to be provided by the fragrant evergreen trees in the boreal regions and the production of isoprene by the marine phytoplankton in the oceans, both of which produced almost equal amounts of these compounds, these aerosols, and both of which have been just about cut in half in the last 50 years. And so the other property about the terpenes, of which cannabis produces about between 58 and 75 different types of monoterpenes and sesquiterpenes, an enormous amount of this material. That's why it's so fragrant. That's why it has such a wonderful smell. It's the volatile terpenes that you're smelling. And these terpenes also have water purification properties that have the potential to purify the hydrologic cycle in their role as the cloud condensation nuclei around which very bright and persistent clouds form. And so, in addition to reflecting the UVB radiation away from the planet, they also provide cloud cover for the planet that does the same thing. So, essentially, cannabis is a crop that produces its own rain because it provides the cloud condensation nuclei that form the rain clouds. It's a tremendously interesting physiological dynamic between the fragrant aerosols and the moisture in the sky that is magical, quite magical. And it's sad that we've turned our back on that magic for so long, but the terpenes have many exceptional properties, and in fact, the U.S. government has a patent on the antioxidizing and neuroprotective properties of the terpenes in cannabis as part of its federal patent, which conflicts and is inconsistent with the scheduling by the DEA, oh, by the way. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, many thanks. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
The second question is about, can you give us some figures about the potentials of carbon sequestering of cannabis? Have you got some data, I don't know, kilogram of CO2 per hectare?
Yes, the carbon sequestration properties of cannabis are exceptional, as you would expect when you look at the size of the plant. All that plant material is, of course, made from carbon. And according to my friend Dr. Andrew Catalaris in New Zealand, cannabis has the potential to sequester 9 US tons of carbon per acre per year. And in addition to that, if grown organically, the soil has the potential to sequester as much as 3 tons of carbon per acre per growing season. The figures from the Rodale Institute. And so organically grown cannabis at the higher end of the potential has a possible 12 US tons of carbon per acre per growing season, which is extraordinary. It's an extraordinary amount of carbon per acre. And again, at the same time, producing extraordinary amounts of oxygen and phytoremediating soils and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. So there's a lot of potential for carbon credits in association with cannabis agriculture, particularly in countries that are heavily dependent on fossil fuels for energy production, and who could use existing energy generation infrastructure to process the cannabis biomass into usable fuels. And so the conversion is not as drastic as it would be if you were going, say, from nuclear to petrochemical, because they're completely different types of generation. But when you're going from one carbon-based feedstock to another carbon-based feedstock, then the infrastructure conversion is much less dramatic. The other thing about cannabis that makes it exceptional in talking about energy production is the fact that it produces so much seed, and that in order to produce the volume of seed needed to plant the acreage required to have an effect, cannabis is capable of producing that seed in a very short period of time because it produces so abundantly. And so the whole equation around cannabis mathematically works out much more favorably than when you compare it with other energy crops, just because we can get it up and running that much quicker. If you plant cannabis in the same soil and climate conditions, the same cultivar for 3 years in a row, the production and performance characteristics of the plant will adapt, because it's a highly adaptable plant. So, when you're looking at the possibility of taking feral hemp from the Midwest United States and planting it in Slovenia, the probability is that those cultivars have that adaptable capacity to make that adjustment in a very short period of time. The danger is if we become dependent on hybrid cultivars that are being bred to produce less and less THC, then we're also sacrificing the adaptability of the plant and its ability to climatize to the regional soil and climate conditions wherever it's planted. And that's an exceptional property that is vastly underrated.
Okay, many thanks.
Many thanks to you as well.
Some other questions?
I would like to ask you, where can I find this information in order to address the Slovak authorities or perhaps Slovak president?
Well, if you Google global broiling, like you would broil a steak, if you Google global broiling, it will take you to my writing. That's how I refer to the increase in UVB radiation. The B in UVB stands for broil. So you can Google global broiling and find many references to my writings online. I've posted all of this online. I'm also just about to finish a book entitled Cannabis versus Climate Change, and I'll be coming out with a digital video documentary following the publication of the book. But if you Google global broiling, it'll take you to my California Cannabis Ministry website, and there's quite a bit of information there. I also have a YouTube channel and videos on Vimeo. Vimeo is another film site where you can see some of my work. But the multi-dimensional and the multifaceted nature of the subject has occupied me for almost 24 years now that I've been studying cannabis and participating in ending the prohibition of it. And I'm just about to launch the world's first Cannabis Cultural Institute in Weed, California, where I live. And Weed, California is in Northern California, which is in the middle of a severe drought, and apparently the farmers in the valleys of California are having a hard time finishing out the season because they don't have water for the rice fields and the other crops that are growing there. And Weed, California is situated in a geographical region that's ideal for producing rain for the rest of the state, because we've got the mountains in Northern California that sort of contain the airflow. And so hopefully by this time next year, the California Cannabis Ministry will have expanded into the Cannabis Cultural Institute, and will be producing atmospheric terpenes that will make rain in California, and see if we can have an effect on that regional condition that is currently just absolutely tragic. The lack of water is something that may motivate our responsible elected officials to finally acknowledge that cannabis is our best chance for addressing climate change and for addressing food security and malnutrition and diseases of nerve degeneration, cancer, and all of the other illnesses, both physiological and evolutionary, that we're facing. We're a sick species. We're currently a parasite on the planet, and in order to achieve a symbiotic relationship with the earth, then cannabis is not optional. And I trust that the world will wake up to the true value of this plant before our time runs out.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hartmann.
Thank you.
Thank you, California. Thank you, United States. Stay with us, see us, and I hope that we will see each other next year here in Slovenia. I will do everything for you. Bye-bye. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much.